Welcome, everyone. As you begin to gather for Selection Committee Insight for virtual AEC shortlist interviews, we'll be beginning shortly. As you begin to arrive, know that there are Q&A and chat functions available. So when you're ready, you can ask questions, but we'll be beginning shortly. So just take a few moments to arrive. All right, well, we're right at the top of the hour. Hello, everyone. My name is Troy Parkinson, and welcome to Sage Presence Selection Committee Insight for virtual AEC shortlist interviews. We're thrilled to have you a part of our presentation today. And for those who are online, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We look forward to a panel discussion led by Dean Hyers. A couple quick housekeeping notes as we begin, as I navigate between screens. First and foremost, you can change your view between gallery view and speaker view. So if you're watching and you want to just see the speakers speak, you can switch to speaker view. If you switch on to gallery view, then you can see sort of the Hollywood Squares approach to all the screens on at the same time. So you have that option there as well. There is also an option for you to ask questions throughout. We would love your questions, this to be an interactive session. So feel free to ask your questions either in the Q&A box on your app or in the way you're viewing, and or through the chat box. You can put information in as well. Lastly, the session will be recorded and we'll send you a link via email and you'll find it on our website at sagepresence.com when we're complete as well. So let's jump right in. I want to introduce our moderator today. Our moderator is Dean Lincoln Hyers, one of the co-founders of Sage Presence and co-author of Winning AEC Interviews. Dean has helped teams interview prep for over the last 20 years and has helped over $4.5 billion in project budgets wins for his clients and the team at Sage Presence. So Dean will be moderating our event. Dean, welcome.
All right, it's great to be here, and I have so been looking forward to this episode of our webinar because we're all asking this question over and over again. What do selection committee panels, what do they think? We're always trying to anticipate what they're thinking. My entire last week was trying to anticipate what the selection committee would be thinking. And so it hit us, hey, why don't we ask them? So we put this panel together so we can ask some folks that understand this from the selection committee members' side. So I'm really excited to introduce the panelists we have. We have with us Katherine Leonidas, who is with the Minnesota State Designer Selection Board. She is the chair of the board, but she's a really interesting person for a couple of reasons. Before she was on the selection committee side, she was an architect. She was a principal at BWBR Architects. And so a big career lifetime of being on the interviewing side, right? Facing the interview. She knows what that world's like from having done hundreds of interviews. Now for 6 years running, she is on the other side of the fence. And so someone who can see both sides of the fence is what really makes me excited to hear what Katherine thinks. And we also have Rick Cline. He is the Professional Services Contract Manager, Port of Vancouver. I first met Rick when he was on a panel in, he was a panelist in, where was that? Portland. And so many of us in this world consider the interview kind of a pain. It's a hoop you have to jump through. But I noticed his passion and excitement when talking about interviews. And he's not only been a selection committee member many times, but he also has a lot to say in putting together the whole interview process. And so really, really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. And then locally we have Michael Mondor, and he is the Chief of Emergency Medical Services at the Maplewood Fire Department. Now, this is really an interesting person because he's not an AEC person. He's not one of us who is in the business of interviewing. He is in his own industry, busy saving lives and helping the community but he just did an interview, a virtual interview, to make a selection for a really big project that's underway. And so now we have a first person point of view on what the interview selection panel is like. How do you make a decision virtually? So that's our group. Really excited to be here. Let me start with one thing for each of you individually. I want to hear about interviews, but let's just hold that for 1 second. Anything else you want to let us know about you would be great. Feel free to introduce anything additional about yourself. And I want to hear, what's your world like now versus like 2 months ago? Everybody's world has suddenly gone either upside down or into some sort of a spin. Tell me, let's start with Katherine. What's your world like right now? And do you have anything else you want to say about yourself?
Well, I'm not so sure I need anything more about myself, but the world is like many others. I'm home certainly much more. While I am retired, I do consult occasionally and have a construction project on that I need to be on site periodically. It's a great way for me to get out and feel like I'm still part of the world. But it has definitely slowed the pace of life and made me able to think a lot more.
How about you, Rick? Tell us anything else you want us to know about you and what's your world like now. You look like you're at the office. I don't know.
I'm at the office. I'm one of the
Isn't that
few.
illegal? Aren't you breaking
Well,
the law?
They tagged us as essential out here. Behind the scenes, we've got a lot of activity going. We had several ships lined up out here trying to get the cargo unloaded. We're trying to keep this economy going as much as we can. And it's really pretty serious right now, as you know. We have been doing a lot of work at home. I've been doing most of my work at home, but there's just a few things that need to be done at the office. And so I thought, well, I'll come in and just make it a day here.
Are you the only one there? No, there's a skeleton crew.
There's a few of us here. Yeah.
Okay.
Probably 4 or 5 out
It's
of
been
25.
a while since my office is my dining room, and the kitchen is right there, and the dogs are hopefully quiet back there. So how about you, Mike? Tell us about anything you want us to know about you and what's your world right now.
Sure. So my world's been obviously extremely busy over the past month or month and a half. We've experienced a lot of changes. There's a lot of ramp up in expectations for the changes due to COVID-19, and now everything's kind of just slowed to a lull. So we feel like our EMS resources are prepared to respond, but we haven't necessarily seen the surge in EMS demand. We've actually seen call volumes decrease over the past several weeks. So we continue to be prepared for that. It's certainly changed our work environment. As a chief officer in a fire department, working from home has never really been a consideration. But we have made that decision to isolate one chief, and it happens to be my rotation this go around. So outside of work, my passion is my family, and now I'm trying to learn how to balance family and work while occupying the same space.
Yep, and so say we all. So let's start shifting our minds towards this whole question of the virtual interview. And I guess let me start with Rick. How are selection committee members adapting to this whole virtual world and what its implications are to picking a project team?
Well, right now we have a number of projects we've just pushed to the right a little bit. We have one in particular that we've had the proposal process completed. Now we're in the interview phase, and we've just contacted our finalists yesterday to say, hang on, stand by. We found it's very important if we could at least have our side of the team in the office together, even using social distancing. If we could keep one side together, then we could move forward. And the consultants are a little bit ahead of us. They've learned to adapt quite well, I think, and they're ready to squeeze on us right now.
Actually, let me see if I'm getting something. So you just said you're trying to get your team together with some social distancing. Does that mean in an interview we would see one shot with all of you around a boardroom?
Yes, and we've actually used the virtual interview process before, and it's worked okay. However, I think everybody probably feels that if you can do a face-to-face, it's just so much better quality of an interview result. So, but right now we're improvising, and we feel like we will be depending heavily on virtual interviews, at least for this year.
Now, one last question on that the scenario you painted with all of you in a room. Your images are going to be pretty small on our screen. What I like is that there's not 30 of them, right? There's a contained group, but you will be, if you've for all of us who've done virtual meetings, when you're all around a table, some of you are pretty small, so we can't read your body language as well, but you kind of can read the group energy. Any thoughts on that?
Well, we've used the group approach where you can see everybody at one time sitting down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're still needing to refine that process a little bit better to figure out what works best.
So Katherine, I believe that a lot of the state projects are shut down or put on hold right now, but surely your colleagues are talking. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? What are you hearing as you chat around with the other selection board members?
Well, at this moment, we don't have a project that's coming close. So part of our challenge is to figure out whether we would be in one room together. And Rick, I really like that perspective that you have relative to that, or whether we would in fact be remote. One of our members is in northern Minnesota, and so she could in fact be remote, which would, I think, for someone interviewing before us would be a real challenge. I think, Dean, you're right. They like to see our reaction to what they're saying, and that little grid or gallery of images is not going to read especially well.
It's kind of a lose-lose, because if you have everyone in individual faces and you get the Hollywood squares, those are hard to read in one way. But if you're all in one video shot and some of us, way back here and farther, the body language is harder to read. So it's going to be difficult no matter what. Can I ask for Katherine, what do you think about, what about us, the interviewing team? Let's just say we could. Would you rather have us all packed into one frame, or would you rather be able to read our individual body language through our individual shots?
I don't know. It would depend on how the team could organize themselves. In part, we're looking to see your personalities, see the personality of the individuals and the chemistry for the agency that's going to be working with them. Unlike Michael or Rick, there is an agency member, that's University of Minnesota or the state of Minnesota or Minnesota State, but the board as a whole don't go beyond the interview stage. So the chemistry is a really vital thing for the client, for the agency, but it's also one for us to see how well they work together. But we're pretty much hands off or stand off on that one, at least in terms of
audience here. Recognize the problem that you've got here. We just heard personality and we heard synergy. Now, personality is better in the one, everyone has their own frame. You get a lot more personality out of this closer image of me, but synergy you don't get this way. Synergy is better in a group. So some of the things we've got to think about is, as we go into the interview, which is more important? Sometimes they really just need to really like the star player, the day-to-day person, which might lend us to one format. If we know it's about synergy, we either have to figure out how to master Hollywood Squares synergy, or we have to be bigger. We have to get our personalities into a group frame. So there's certainly some very big considerations. So I'm thinking for Mike, you just went through the process. What did you like about the virtual interview process, and what was difficult? And keep in mind, ultimately, this process is for people to make a good choice. It's not about the interview team. It's about the selection committee making a choice. So what did you like about the process? What didn't you like?
Well, we were kind of in the middle of some uncertainty. The recommendations continued to change, and we were bouncing back and forth. Can we do this in person? Should we not do this in person? So like Rick mentioned, one piece for us was, do we get all these basically department heads and put them in the same room and socially distance them, or try to deal with the mechanics of separating them? And we decided to have the whole panel in one room, which I agree with the discussion. It's very difficult for the firm to pick up on how we're receiving the information, and a lot easier to lose a certain member's or multiple members' attention as the presentation maybe veers off.
Can I ask what platform you were on? And two questions. What platform were you on, and was the interviewing team, were they all separated?
We were on Zoom,
Okay.
which I think worked well. The teams were all separated, which from my vantage point, I think was more effective than trying to pack them in a room. Obviously that synergy doesn't exist in the traditional way, but if you could tell the firms that had practiced this and worked those handoffs to build some of that. And I think if you take time and practice that on the front end, it shows from the interviewee standpoint that, you know, they are prepared, and that they can bounce back and forth in a more traditional way, although we have to do it electronically.
Michael, can I ask how many were involved in the interview from the team's point of view?
From the teams, there was anyone from 3 to 6 people.
Okay.
And I would say that
did the bouncing back and forth go pretty well? So they had practice when they would hop in on each other. Let me describe two things so I can get at my question. It could have been more like orchestrated handoffs on the presentation material, or it could have been they're hopping in on each other and learning to improvise, like sort of in the Q&A possibly. Which was it more like, formal or informal hopping in and out?
There was more informal. I think the most successful method was having one presenter, so one person leading that presentation, and then having each team member clearly understand that this is where I'm going to step in, and that as they went through the presentation, that was clean. When it came to the interview portion and more Q&A, that's where it got, you know, it's a little bit more difficult. So I would say my recommendation would be to continue to have a point person. So if I were the project team leader, the question would come to me. And then if I wanted to delegate that to a team member, I'd say, hey, Dean, why don't you handle that? Rather than have 3 team members all trying to kind of chime in. And then it just kind of gets messy.
Excellent. Okay, so for those of you who saw our webinar last week, what Mike's saying is consistent with this idea of an anchor or a host. I'm the moderator, and I'm sort of quarterbacking the question. So there's lots of different analogies for what that would be, but we're getting reinforcement that at least at this time in history, is a good starting point to have someone hosting your experience.
Dean, I want to interject with a question.
Yeah.
From one of our audience members. Actually, I'll throw out 2, because one is very interesting that we collectively may have not thought of yet, and that's a question about masks. If your team is together in a boardroom with masks for safety, in a social distancing world where the new recommendation may be to wear masks in public, how do you position the camera to pan in or capture the body language or movement appropriately when everyone's wearing a mask?
Okay, that is a really, really tough one. Was that from Carol? I saw Carol from DC's name pop up on my screen. I don't know if that was her question or not.
That was an anonymous question.
Well, hi, Carol, anyway. So this one is a tough one, this mask thing. And this is media, right? This is like the cinema. We mask people to make them look scarier, you know, to look like the bad guy. Well, no, of course there is the Lone Ranger, so maybe it can work. But the whole point of a mask is to conceal this information. And so I would say, I personally would opt, and great to hear some other sound offs on this one. I personally would rather have you separated and in your own space, get your body.
Yeah. I agree.
Rather than I mean, it would look like an operating room if you're looking at a group of people who are already small and they all have masks. So that's my reaction. Anyone want to chime in? I'll open up the floor.
That really impedes the process, Dean. I think that you're right. I think I would go to the individual screens to try to capture more than you would with the masks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. I would also, I mean, obviously, I'm coming from a public safety point of view, but I would question the necessity of gathering everyone in that room when technology exists. So from a project standpoint, it's like, is that really responsible to pack all these people in the same room for the sole purposes of a presentation when it could be accomplished otherwise? Not to mention the limitations you're going to have when you're covering people up with masks.
So I think, so Troy, let's have your second question. I think we're getting a pretty consistent sense that the point of this is to get synergy and personality, and you lose too much putting people together with the mask. Better to take advantage of one thing that the virtual environment does, lets you see our faces.
So the next question that comes in is a conversation about platforms. And so it's really a question of, if you have to do this on a smaller device like an iPad or a smartphone, what recommendations do you have to navigate personalities through small devices?
Has anyone had that? So I do a lot with my iPhone in terms of Zoom meetings that are audio. I'm trying to remember. I think once I Zoomed in, from my phone, they do the same thing. So you have to start with the idea that other than the fact that it's smaller, the same possibilities exist. So I'm going to just start out with the fact that it's possible. It is possible to do this from a phone. Has anybody, have any of you panelists tried or experienced it? The only experience I ever had is one time. It was just a meeting, not an interview. But somebody was on a drive and we were all Zoomed, put the camera on the dashboard, kept driving, but you could see him and he could talk to us. It was weird, but it worked. So any thoughts, group, on that?
Well, I certainly have not experienced that, but I would imagine one of the biggest challenges is getting far enough away so that you can actually see them. I've seen enough selfies to know that it's not a great view.
Yeah. So you'd have to treat it the same way you're treating, like before this webinar started, I got a chance to chat with the panelists, and a lot of them took some time to think about their background, and notice how all of these people are doing what I said last week. They're getting their angle is sort of square on, kind of camera mouth height. So you'd have to take the same precautions with your phone. I'm going to say, because it works well enough, the cameras are high def, this I would expect to become okay as people start experimenting, but they do have to pay attention to camera angles. And I don't think we want to see, kind of you while you're at the grocery store. I think I would just simply say, that's my camera. I have to look at myself in the frame, and it'll be harder because it's smaller.
Yeah, and I would say, while it's possible, I've found it much easier to track what's going on and track the different contributors when I'm just sitting in front of my laptop versus trying to use the phone. Yeah,
that makes sense. As long as the laptop isn't on your laps, it bounces.
Yeah.
I've seen some crazy stuff. Now I got a question for everybody. The hardest thing that I feel that I'm contending with as an interview prep coach is I don't know how to make the team look like a team. They don't look like a team because they're in different environments. I can kind of tell Rick is at a professional office space, and I can tell the rest of us are home. Michael is somewhere virtual, and I'm in my home. How do you look like a team, and what's the impact of that to you as a selection committee when we're not all in the same environment? Rick, maybe you're the one I want to hear from first on that one. How do you look like?
Yeah, that's a challenging question there, Dean. I think that for me, and when I'm thinking of the other team members, when we see how they interact, that's where you see the team gel and the synergy there, how they work off of each other a little bit. Just to see them by image, I think that would be difficult. But to see how they work together is really where we see the teamwork.
Well, and that's frustrating because the thing you're looking for is one of the harder elements of this platform.
That's right, it is.
We look like a team because of the way we work together, but this is the hardest way to do that.
Yeah.
Love to, let's see. Anybody have a Go ahead, Troy.
Sorry, I just wanted to chime in on that because a couple questions came in this conversation. And that's a key question about looking the same. Does it help when teams come in wearing the same company polo or wearing the same team colors, if you will? What's your thought, selection committee, on having appropriate clothing, if you will, or matching clothing?
Well, I think matching clothing is probably, it wouldn't make much difference to me and certainly to anyone else. You know, that you look professional is fine.
Yeah.
As soon as you start looking like you went to the same tailor, it doesn't come off casual. It doesn't come off well, in my point of view.
So that you're losing too much personality, and you can sort of see the stunt in it. You know, we've shown up in our company colors, and it's not going to sway you.
No.
So what will sway you more, if I'm understanding, is I want to see who you are. Dress like you, obviously professional. I want to see, I think we'd all agree you should dress for business on these things, but dress in a way that your personal brand is represented and we get a sense of who you are. And then it feels more authentic. So authenticity is your goal, right? My understanding?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, any other thoughts on that? Either of these questions. How do we look like a team? What about wardrobe? The thing I want to point out for the audience is this group is doing last week's assignment because all of our angles are somewhat similar. See how we're taking up the same amount of space, more or less. We're looking at the camera square. Troy and I are standing. I think everyone else is sitting, but you can do some things to at least be similar-ish. But any other thoughts on how to look like a team? All right.
Yeah, I think that the teamwork will show in the preparation for the presentation. I mean, I would expect that the interview, all the team members dress as they would as if they were sitting in front of us in a conference room. But the teamwork will show in their preparation.
So when you say preparation, folks, that means we've got to rehearse that back and forth. We've got to rehearse the handoffs. The host has to rehearse how they're going to pass it around. And, so Troy and I practiced our part a little bit this morning. And then with the group in the 15, 20 minutes before the webinar began, we started to get comfortable with each other. In an interview, you want to practice that more. Practice Q&A so you can see how does one person answer and another hop on, and try to get that process down. So what's great is it is a clear instruction. The instruction is practice bouncing around, handing off so that you can show your synergy, because we're hearing loud and clear from this panel, synergy is the biggest thing. That's the most common response that we've heard since the webinar began.
Well, Dean, I would say the other thing sorry, Troy.
No, please,
The
Katherine.
other thing to coordinate are handouts or visuals that you're trying to point to. So often we'll have people come with a schedule, or they'll come with some kind of diagram that kind of articulates an approach to a site or approach to mechanical systems. And those are kind of far more challenging when you're dealing in the virtual world.
So that leads to a question for Mike. What did your interview teams do for visuals? How much of it was talking head? How much was a PowerPoint with talking heads on the side? What did people do?
I was about 60-40 of kind of the traditional presentation, PowerPoint, some video. And then I think one cautionary tale is that the more technical that teams started to get, the more issues that reared their heads. So it's nice to want to try to explain that stuff, but if it doesn't go off well in the presentation, then it can be very distracting for the interview team.
So keep it simple and sort of traditional. So were they running a PowerPoint while you could see like the little smaller windows to the side? Was that mostly?
Yeah, that was primarily most of the presentations, how they went.
So you talked about, kind of what the big fail was. That was one of the questions that someone submitted us in advance was, what's the big fail that we should be worried about? And what's the big win that we should be focused on?
Yeah, I think the challenge is the multiple handoffs that you would do naturally in a conference room, they don't work as well in this environment. And if it's not well practiced, then you end up spending 3 to 5 minutes working on technology, and it can derail the presentation, and then you disengage the interview team.
So everybody's terrified that their tech isn't going to work. I personally worry that I'm going to start stuttering, and the video is going to break down. How much is that a problem? Like, let's just say you're doing an interview. Let's say they're doing it well, but simple technology things that might not even be their fault. Just some things don't work. How big of a deal is that?
I would say the biggest thing for me was don't make excuses about the technology. This is the world we're living in. We're all trying to sort through it. I wouldn't hold anybody, or I wouldn't blame anyone for technical glitches that are beyond their control. I think everyone has a reasonable amount of understanding about what we're dealing with technology-wise. So it's more of a turnoff from my standpoint to make a bunch of excuses about this. We would be so much better if we were in the room with you versus the environment that we have to operate in. So.
Sure. Katherine, big wins or big fails? What comes to mind for you?
Well, I think I think some of the big fails are when the team doesn't have the right message. And it's all about the message. It's one thing just to stand up there and introduce yourselves, but if you don't have a focused idea of what you're trying to say, that could really hurt you.
Excellent. And so one thing, just so you know, I learned from you, I had sat in on some of the state designer selection events, watched the 3 interviews, sat through the selection deliberation, and I was hearing the ones that not only had clear messages, but sort of gang them together in a point of view. They had a really clear perspective. I remember how you responded to them, and your, they gave you a framework to hold everything. So I just wanted, you've been an influence for me on that particular point, because I saw it in action. So really listen to that one. It's not about a bunch of stuff. It's about taking all the stuff and figuring out what's the point, what's your perspective, and what is the point of view you're bringing. And that helps them, and that's more important than the technology. Rick, I want to hear from you. Big fails or big opportunities in the virtual platform?
Well, I think when I hear the team really gelling together, they're almost finishing each other's sentences, they're dialed in. That's impressive to us. They know what they're talking about. They've done some homework on the port. They know what we need. They're zeroing in, and as Katherine and Michael both said, I agree 100% there that you really need a team that's really targeting what we need. And I think that on the flip side, we've done some conference call interviews as well. And I think that the one thing that is least attractive to us is if someone's reading it. If they're just reading a script. And I think my 2 colleagues probably have had to deal with that a little bit too. But in my view, if you really know what you're talking about and you work with it and you have that passion that comes through as well, that's really important to us.
Okay, so let's capture something off of that. If that's really so important, it also means that even if you do know what you're talking about and you do have passion, if you then read it off your screen, no one will think that you do. So you're torpedoing your own potential of showing that you know it. That's why improv is so much better. That's why speaking from the heart instead of the script is so important. So excellent. Troy, I've got a couple more questions, but I want to open up. Did you have any burning audience questions?
Yeah, there were a couple that I think are poignant right at this moment. First and foremost, this comes from Heidi, and she asks, did the selection committee set up the virtual meeting, or was this done by the interview team? So I think ultimately for a selection panel is, who's deciding what format to use? And if so, what formats are you finding best?
And who's that? Was that directed to
Michael? I think you can start. I know you mentioned Zoom earlier, but were you in control? Did you send the invite to the meeting, or did the interview team send their invite to you?
So we hosted the meeting and sent out the invites, and we wanted control over that. One, a nice point was a lot of the firms reached out and said, look, we're familiar with this technology. We'd be happy to assist you to set these meetings up. So if I worked in a smaller community that maybe doesn't have the same access to resources, that would be a nice gesture, but we wanted to have control. The other platform we've used successfully is Microsoft Teams. Can be a little bit more complicated, but I think it works as well, or if not better in some circumstances than Zoom.
So Mike, would you think it'd be a good idea for AEC companies to get a bunch of different platforms and play around with them so that they're ready to adapt? So let's say we're doing an interview at XYZ company and they want to do Teams. It's like, oh no, we do Zoom. Should we be prepared to use different platforms?
Absolutely. I think, you should anticipate there's some big ones out there and just start playing with those and get familiar with them, because you don't want every time you're going to do an interview to try to have to relearn a new platform and figure out how you're going to work on the things we've already discussed.
Right. So the list we've got is there's Zoom, there's WebEx, there's Teams, there's Blue Jeans, there's Hangouts. I don't know which one I'm forgetting. There's a few more, but start to get familiar with them, and you don't always have control. I would love to hear from any of you. What if we have an opinion on that? So Mike, you said that, we wanted to have control. So I'm over there with the architecture team maybe, and we want to have control. Are you open to that? I'd love to hear each of you give an opinion on how fair is it for us to call you and say, listen, we don't want to present ourselves in a certain way. We would like to use this platform. What do you say back?
I think, Dean, for me, I think it's important to maintain an equitable playing field. So we direct the process and expect that the finalists can work with us on that. And that's something that we're looking for. How can you work with us?
Got it. Okay, and Rick, how about this? What if one of our people, so we've got sort of the tech producer type. So right now, Troy is that for me. Can Troy spend a little time talking with your producer tech and sort of understand, like collaborate on how we can bring you the best? Because I remember you on your panel, one of the things you said is that you work really hard to try to build an interview process that's better so that the architects and engineers and construction companies could come and bring you better. And Can we work together on that?
Absolutely. We're always looking to do it better, and we can learn as much from the industry as they can from us. So if there's ways to do it better, let's work together to figure out how to do that.
And how open are you, or do you imagine other people are, if we say, can we make sure you have you're viewing this in a certain way? Like, we'd like you to be in presenter mode here. Let's say gallery view for Q&A, because the Hollywood squares would be better for Q&A, but during our presentation, we'd like you to be in presenter view. Can we ask that?
Well, that's something we haven't had to deal with yet, but
well, I'm asking.
You're asking, okay. It really depends on if we're dealing with 4 or 5 finalists and we think that it's reasonable and it's what we're asking for is something everybody's familiar with, we'll probably stay in that type of parameter. If someone's calling and saying, hey, we want to tweak this and want to change this, we'll push back a little bit, saying, well, let's stay within the same parameters as the other group's working with. Doesn't mean we wouldn't change something. If we thought it was a good idea, we'd go back to the rest of the finalists and say, we'd like to make some adjustments. So.
How many of you would be open to, if we said, we're going to bring up a virtual whiteboard, and we would like each of you, or actually what I've discovered is in the PowerPoint mode, if we have the audience use the annotation feature, you can draw a picture or circle something or write on it. What if we brought up a picture of, say, a timeline, and we said, selection committee, we'd like you to bring, assuming we told you in advance and maybe our producer made sure you know where the annotation feature is, on this timeline, we'd like you to mark whatever area you feel is the most vulnerable to problems. And we actually asked the selection committee to do that. Or if we asked you to do a poll, we want to hear how many people, I'm not quite sure, I can't make up a good reason for a poll, but we're voting on this or that. And we actually do a vote and it brings up, now, Mike, I know what you're thinking. Just hang with me, because what you're thinking is I'm going down that path of bringing up the complex tools, and if they don't work, it's a problem. But I just want to know if you'd be open as a selection committee to interacting in some way like that. How about Mike first? Would you be open if we said, listen, we're really skilled at using this feature. We'd like to get some selection committee input. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I guess my first blush would be I would prefer that would be done in more of a traditional Q&A manner than using gadgets to do so. I'm not opposed to it. I do 100% agree with Rick's statement about leveling the playing field. And I think just to try to provide everyone with the same opportunities, that would be my point of view.
Fair enough. Okay, Katherine, the State Designer Selection Board is not big on interactivity. It often is not allowed. So maybe the system answers this for me, but I'm just curious from your point of view. If somebody wanted you to do something interactive during a virtual interview, does that sound okay or not so cool?
I think it would be very risky. And I particularly since many of them will not, some of the firms will not have interacted with us before. So I as somebody preparing for an interview, forget my hat now as chair, but somebody preparing for an interview, I would think that that's just a risk I would not want to take.
Rick, same answer. So you got 2 for 2, batting 1,000.
You got some great responses with Michael and Katherine on that. In our process, we do allow at the very end of the interviews, if they have any questions for us. It might be a little risky, but they might say, listen, we do. And if they could really, consolidate it down into a very simple activity. See, we'd like to know where the weak point is of this project or something on this timeline. We might go with it.
So I mean, are you okay? I'm betting the group is not, that was a little out of the box, but if it's simply maybe stopping and doing some Q&A as we go, that's probably more okay. So before we leave budget and move on to schedule, what questions did we raise in this? Is something like that more okay just because it's not technology? We're just open.
We really like an interactive type of a process in the interview process. We actually suggest to them it's a culture. It's kind of I want to say more casual in a sense. We like to be able to improvise a little bit and ask a question here and there that may not be part of the questions that they prepared for.
Would you use a chat window? So one of the things we're doing in some meetings and webinars is, since people aren't always sure they want to interrupt and take the floor, we leave the chat feature open. We got that open now, and some people have been submitting questions to us. Would that be acceptable?
You know, that's a hard one for us to answer right now. I think a little more experience under our belt, we could give you a better response. I'd defer back to my colleagues on that.
All right, so we've got a pretty clear answer group that what we're hearing is stick to the traditional, which is what I said last week, is we're going to be taking a back step. This isn't the best time to see how creative we can be and how out of the box. Let's go in the box a little bit and just try to get the virtual communication, get the tag teaming going. So that's clearly the most important thing. And with it, we're here to try to express a point of view and make clear messaging. So that's loud and clear. Troy, I know we're going to take some more group questions. Let me just kick in a kind of key one to me. There are several factors that are inherently in any interview. And so the list I came up with is one, in this case, is the tech working? You know, does it work? And so some grasp and mastery of the tech. The next one on my list is there are visuals. There's probably a PowerPoint, sitemap, design visualizations, different things like that. So there's the tech and there's the visuals. There's the main messages. There's flow and synergy, and then there's people and faces. I would like for each of you to tell me which is the most important influencer for you personally out of the tech, the visuals, the messages, the flow and synergy, or the people and faces. So Rick, which is the most important?
That's a tough one. You know, I'm going to stand back and look at how the whole process went together. There might be some points scored in a few of those areas, and a few points, less points in some other areas, but collectively, they produced a good presentation given the type of dynamics they're working with, and they get a little grace with that as well.
So I'm not letting you off the hook. So if you had to break that down, and okay, I agree with what you said, but that good presentation is an amalgam of the tech, the visuals, the messages, the synergy, and the human faces. Do you have a guess on which one of those gives you the most sway?
I don't, Dean. I think you've identified some great subjects there that collectively work.
Okay, so I got your answer. Your answer is balance. This is
It's
about
balance,
a balance
absolutely.
of
For us,
the
it is.
traffic equalizer. Got that answer. That works. Katherine,
Well,
I might know yours, but
I mean, I'm gonna stand behind Rick. It is all about balance. But what, the one thing that's kind of interesting about an interview, we all get proposals, and maybe we even have some idea of who is 1, 2, 3, and 4 on those proposals. But the interview can really shake up that order very
Absolutely.
carefully or very quickly. And I think that comes it comes from the personalities of the individuals.
Okay, so the personality, the people is going to be a big part. Your previous answer would be the message as being,
Yep.
but you supported the balance. You emphasized the sort of the people and how they sway it. What I've been hearing is until about 2007, the interview was usually won. The interview is where you won the process. Now the interview is where you lose. So it's like it's so hard to eat, wherever you stand on the proposal, this last leg of the journey suddenly throws things in a different way. So you want to be human, and you want to be there with the messages.
In my world, if you've made the interview, you can do the work.
That's
There's
right.
there's no
Exactly.
question about it. You can do the work.
Okay.
But it's getting that little bit that becomes part of the process of, am I going to work with these people?
Excellent. So, Michael, what do you think on that? Was there any of those out of tech, visuals, messages, synergy, or faces? What has the most sway for you?
We may have lost Michael. He is also navigating a home environment with.
Oh, that's okay. All right. Well, that's fine. Let's go
He may
on.
come back in.
We'll
Let me move
circle
on,
back.
Dean, with where we're at now. And what I'm going to call this is sort of for our panelists, and for you, Dean, is our lightning round. So this is the lightning Q&A.
All right. Soundbite time, everybody.
Yeah, soundbite. So keep your, as best you can, keep your answers short so we can get through as many questions as possible. A big thing right now is about backgrounds. And we may circle back to this question if Michael is able to get back on. But a question becomes, how important are virtual backgrounds versus natural? Oh, excellent. Hi, Michael. Welcome back.
Was that a test?
That
Yeah.
was a test. How do we do?
Passed. You did great. Okay, keep going, Troy.
So my question for the panelists is, how important are virtual backgrounds? We all noticed, Michael, that you're using a virtual background. Do you personally like the virtual backgrounds if your interview team has them, or do you prefer them in their natural environment because the tech isn't always solid?
Well, there's certainly limitations with backgrounds. I was talking with the other panelists. I'm in my basement and didn't really feel like rearranging my house for my Zoom meetings. But it can get kind of shadowy, and depending, I'm not an expert on AV, but our communications people put this together for us. Some of the backgrounds we've used, you get these halos around your head, and it kind of can be distracting. The other part I noticed here, it kind of looks like I have tops of the garage doors are growing out of my head. So you don't want to lose your message on a background. And I would just say not to get too gimmicky with it. If you do, we don't want to see your team on a beach or what, there's a ton of different Zoom backgrounds you can throw in there.
All right, Rick or Troy, do you want to just take one answer and go to the next question?
No, I think a quick answer from each of our panelists would be helpful.
All right, Rick.
Yeah, I concur with Mike on that. I think just a realistic background is fine, and we're comfortable with something that just is sensible.
I like that. Balanced, sensible. Katherine.
Well, and I would go to great extremes to create something special in the background. You might put your logo if that's important to you, or the logos of all the team members. You might even put, the logo of the agency. But I think keep it simple.
Excellent. Thank you all. Next question comes, my team has always leaned against outnumbering the selection committee members when we're in the same room. Is it less important on a virtual interview? Does it matter if you have 10 people on the interview and there are only 3 people on the selection committee? Katherine, let's start with you and then Mike and Rick.
Well, I think you bring the voices that really reinforce your message. And I don't care whether that's 10 or 1 or 2. Just find the right voices that need to be there, the prominent voices. As a rule, I think you don't need a cast of thousands to be in that room to be a good presenter.
Excellent answer. That's a great answer to that. What else? Sorry for hopping in and judging, but I love that answer.
Yeah, I would agree with Katherine. I don't think that more is necessarily better in these presentations case.
Rick?
Yeah, I think the key players are essential to the presentation, and we're not one on numbers either, but I don't know that more makes it an advantage at all, really.
And I'd even add, even on the proposal level, we sometimes see pages and pages and pages of people that I don't need to see the job captain unless that's a key individual.
Okay, let me hop in quickly on this one. I think part of the nature of this question is sometimes we believe that we have 7 people and we want, these are the right voices. For whatever reason, we believe that's the case, but the selection committee is only 4 people. Is it okay to outnumber them if we brought our 7? Because let's assume we thought they were all important. Is that okay? Sounds like.
I think there's no magic equation. If
Right.
they're the 7 voices that really make a difference, I want to see 7.
Okay, great.
All right, next question is directed to Michael, and it's a question about video. In your presentation, did anybody actually use video? If so, how did that play through the Zoom interface? And was it helpful to see a video versus a slideshow?
They did. It did not work well, and I would say it did not help the presentation.
Was that because of just the video, maybe the technology didn't work or the video wasn't very good? Or are you kind of blanketing that out, risky move bringing in video?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a risky move. B, you're having in this case, they're trying to transfer control of the presentation. And then there were some technology issues that you probably would have had worked out on the front end if you were all in the same room on one presentation with embedding the file.
So audience, here's the thing to track with this. The reason to use video is usually because you need something emotional, and video is a really good tool if it's done right. There was a video we used in a live interview once. It just choked you up. It was a beautiful thing with people. And every time I saw it, I cried. It just was so powerful. So the reason you do it is because to win this project, you have to make an emotional connection, and this video has the emotion. That's the most powerful use that I've seen. Or because you want to hear it from like testimonials or something that are so powerful from a client. But I try to avoid it in general myself because it's risky.
Another question that comes in is a question about building relationships with the selection committee. As people are interviewing for these projects, do you prefer advanced telephone calls? In this virtual world now, how can individuals build relationships with you? Would you take a Zoom meeting so you can get some of that face-to-face with someone in advance?
Well, for me, the state of Minnesota requires that they cannot approach us.
Right.
And talk about these projects. So, I mean, that would be a real challenge.
Mm-hmm. But they can in between projects. So I know I've interacted with selection committee members when there's not a project at stake. How would you feel if with no project at stake, somebody says, hey, Katherine, I'm from thus and such architecture firm. Can I give you a ring and just chat with you and find out what's going on? Or, I don't know, but same reason you catch up with anybody when there's no project on the books.
Again, we're a public body. And so if you do it for one, you got to do it for everybody. And so that becomes a real challenge from our end.
Okay. So that's risky. How about with you, Rick?
Well, now we're in a little different world. We're what's called a quasi-municipality, so we're a mix of private and public. So we have a sales team that's all over the world looking, and developing relationships. And going back to our world of projects, if we don't have a project that we're pursuing through a solicitation, then it's pretty well open if any of the consulting firms want to touch base and know who some of the people are here. However, back to Catherine's statement there, we go dark basically when we're in that process of acquiring in the procurement process, acquiring the contracts for consultants. It's hands off then.
Now, how about, so Mike, the question for you is, when there's not a project at stake, how do you feel about architecture firms just saying, hey, can we do a virtual meeting? I'd love to catch up and see what's going on for 2020. Are you cool with people just, is that kosher?
Yeah, that's fine to try to build those relationships and keep up to date with what's going on with different projects. I think that'd be well received.
So the answer, oh, go ahead, Catherine, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, but understand the State Designer Selection Board, which is, you know, the members of that board, they don't know what projects are coming online. So really the interest that they should have is reaching out to either the state agencies, the University of Minnesota, or the Minnesota State colleges and universities to get a feel for what those projects are.
So the answer is going to come down to, it depends, but certainly do outreach to find out if it's okay. I spoke with a selection committee member I believe it was the U of M, and she said that we are not, her personal guess was, way more likely to go with someone who bothers to check in here and there and just ask what's going on for us. It helps us feel that they care about us, not only when there's a project at stake, but different organizations have different rules and guidelines of what's okay. So start with the idea that it's nice to stay in touch with customers, not only, you know, at times that there isn't a project, but it really will depend on the rules and the guidelines of what's okay. So Troy, anything else we can?
Yeah, well, we're coming up on the last 5 minutes of our hour session here. So I think for any of the other questions that came in, we'll make note of them and see if we can get you answers through our blog or through an email. But I think, Dean, you can wrap it up with any final thoughts from our panelists.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. Let's get, if there's anything last that you'd just like to share about to these architects, engineers, construction folks who are dialing here with us today, any last thoughts for them that could be either what you want us to know or a thought that could help us do better for you? Let's start with Rick.
Well, I think for us as a port, it's very important for us to have consultants that are interested in working with us and get to know how we work. We're different from many other public agencies, so getting to understand our world is very important. Engaging in some of the activities, the events, things to get to know us a little bit better really helps. And having that passion and interest to really want to work for the port. It's important to us.
Awesome. And Michael, any last thoughts for our audience?
Yeah, I would kind of piggyback on what Rick had to say. As much as I want to learn about your firm, I want to know what you know about Maplewood and what you're going to do to make this project successful for Maplewood.
Excellent. So we can't forget the main character. The main character has got to be the prospect and who the prospect cares about, the community the prospect's in. That's where the focus is. And it's more important than learning about you as a AEC firm. Catherine, you get the last word. What would you like to leave us with? Let's see. Catherine?
It is all about the projects. And we really don't need, at this point, to hear more about your credentials as much as what your approach is to the client or the issues that they're facing. Schedule, money, budget, design, systems, anything like that.
Beautiful. So everyone listening, what we're hearing loud and clear is from what it's mostly about, it's the main character is them. And it's the problematic beginning that they have and the happier ending that they want and how you can play a role in getting them there. It's about how that project solves problems for the main character. Secondly, in terms of what you're going to be valued by, this is just a platform. It's just a venue. It still comes down to the messages and bringing a point of view and being there to help. And synergy is probably the thing to work on the most. It's the thing they want to see the most from us that this platform isn't perfect for. So those would be my quick sums and highlights of this. But I want to take the quick moment to thank each one of you, Katherine, Rick, Michael, for serving on this panel. We've not gotten to hear this from you before. And Troy, for producing this really well. This has been a very great hour, and I've definitely learned a lot. So thank you, everybody, for putting this together. Troy, any last closing?
Yes, I reiterate what Dean said. Thank you, everyone. Just for your upcoming records, please note that we're going to be following up on your request for more webinar series that speak directly to you and your needs. So coming up on May 5th, we'll be doing Navigating Virtual Business Development. And then, so you can tune into that, and you'll see information about that coming soon. Lastly, if you have any questions or need to reach out with questions following this, if you have questions specifically for our panelists, feel free to send them our way, and we'll make sure that they get the information as well. But thank you so much for participating today. We hope this insight was valuable, and we look forward to our next opportunity to connect. Be well and stay safe, everyone.